Welcome to Cigar City Radio episode number 1. I'm your host, Randy Ojeda, and making the magic happen is Jason Solanes.
How's it going?
Before we begin, I want to give a sincere thanks to everybody for listening. We spent a long time planning and working on this show, and we really appreciate you giving it a chance. Our goal is to introduce listeners to great new music while also giving underground and independent artists a platform to share the stories behind that music. Our guest on the first episode is Jeremy Greenspan from electronic pop duo Junior Boys. We talk about touring the U.S., life in his hometown of Hamilton, Canada, his multiple 2016 releases, making music in a much smaller city, and a number of other topics. If you enjoy this episode, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button. Follow us at Cigar City MGMT on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We have a lot more episodes coming down the pipeline, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. So here it is, episode 1. Anyways, did you expect you were going to be in a hurricane in Tampa, Florida in October?
I felt that was going to happen the whole time, and we've planned it this way. I've been looking at weather systems for a couple of months to figure out, to make sure that we could. The idea was that I wanted to make sure that if there was a low turnout at any of the shows in Florida, that I could blame it on a hurricane.
It's a great excuse, man. Yeah. It really is. But I don't think you're going to have a low turnout tonight. You're playing tonight at the Crowbar.
Correct.
Which should be a pretty great show. I mean, you've been here a few times,
Sure.
right?
Other than the fact that there is a hurricane.
Well, but see, the thing is, we party when there's a hurricane.
Sure,
like,
okay.
Kind of like it's sort of like having a snow day, but
Yeah.
there's a much more imminent threat of damage and destruction, I guess.
Gotcha. We have that kind of like that in Canada when there's like bear attacks. Like sometimes roving groups of bears will come into the city, and then everybody just kind of locks down and has a party.
How do they report that? Is that on the weather? Like imminent bear attacks? They're forming a line in the forest?
You can just tell.
You just know.
So that's Canadian sense.
That's that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we just
That's
get together and.
Yeah, I know nothing about Hamilton, Canada. I was thinking about that. I was like, I know something about Toronto, I guess.
Sure.
I know, but I couldn't. If you told me to find Hamilton on the map, I don't think I could. I know
it's pretty damn close to Toronto.
That's what I was thinking, because it's that Ontario area.
Yeah.
So was that like a province?
Ontario is a province.
Okay, all
That
right.
is
Just
correct,
making sure I got the terminology right.
Just like Florida's a state.
Exactly.
Ontario is a province, correct.
So yeah, all I know about Hamilton is, for whatever reason, I've always known that Neil Peart is from Hamilton.
The drummer from Rush.
The drummer from Rush, yeah.
I didn't.
That's
actually didn't know that he was from Hamilton.
That's what I know. That's
Okay.
all I know about Hamilton. And there's, I think, a CFL team.
There's a CFL team from Hamilton. There's a lot of famous comedians from Hamilton.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you think that's about?
I don't know. All the famous people from Hamilton that you would know would all be comedians, probably, other than the drummer for Rush.
Other than Neil Peart, the drummer and lyricist from Rush.
Yeah. So Martin Short and Eugene Levy.
Okay. Yeah.
And Dave, basically all of SETV. Those guys were all from Hamilton, and
I know that Canada has its own genre of comedy almost. There's Trailer Park Boys. There's a lot of great comedians that come from there, but
those guys are all from Halifax.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it something about just the being Canadian that it's the cold and that just makes you want to?
It's just a funny thing.
It's just a hilarious
thing. Being from Canada is just a funny thing.
I wanted to be Canadian when I was growing up. This is an odd thing to say, I guess, but I wanted to be Canadian because all my favorite wrestlers were from Canada.
Interesting.
Chris Jericho was my favorite wrestler.
Okay. So there used to be a wrestler from Hamilton whose name was Iron Mike Sharp.
Okay.
He was one of those guys who, I'm probably older than you, but when you were watching wrestling in the 80s, it would be like Macho Man versus And then, on TV, there'd be like Macho Man versus some nobody.
Right,
Well, one
jobbers.
of those
Yeah.
nobodies was Iron Mike Sharp.
That's
And
a
I remember-
noble thing, though.
Yeah, I
You know,
remember
somebody's gotta
going to
lose.
watch wrestling at the hockey arena in Hamilton, and
seeing
Iron Mike
Iron Mike-
Sharp fought like Macho Man or something, and I
But
think
would he
won.
lose?
No, I think he won in
I
Hamilton.
would hope
which is
so, right?
Which is absurd, of course.
Yeah.
But it would made sense in the fact that wrestling isn't real,
Right.
so they can just make up whatever they want.
Yeah, you can't have somebody lose in front of their hometown crowd.
Full disclaimer, folks.
Yeah, we're breaking new ground here. Wrestling is
Yeah.
actually not real.
But I remember there was like Quebecois muscle man. I can't remember his name. Like Dino Valenti or something like that. There was a bunch of Canadian guy and Bret
Yeah.
Hart and all those guys.
yeah, well, the Hart Dungeon was there. A
Yeah.
lot of like wrestlers there. A lot of wrestlers here in Florida too. I mean, we don't have to talk about wrestling the whole time, but
Yeah,
but
I've
I
exhausted most of my material.
yeah, but there are a lot of wrestlers from Florida for whatever reason.
I
So
bet.
I think
Alligators.
yeah, alligators, and something about the heat makes people a little crazy and makes
Sure.
you want to just rip your shirt off and
Sure.
fight.
I'm feeling it.
I'm definitely feeling it.
Yeah.
That's one thing that's interesting about Florida is we don't really have seasons, so
Right.
it's just hot and then it's hotter and
Yeah.
continually hotter.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then hurricanes and then, but it's like,
Yeah, it's like a hillbilly California.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But you've come here a few times, so I wanted to talk to you about that. It's
Lots of
like,
times, yeah.
And is it just you just want this humidity and heat? You just want to feel it, or do you just love the crowds here? Like
I get asked to
you
to
get asked
play,
to come. Oh,
and then they offer me money, and I come.
then you
That's
go.
how it works, man.
that's great though. That's great.
But no, in seriousness, we did a tour in the spring where we played, the places in America that one would expect to play. We
Yeah.
played in New York and Los Angeles, all the big cities.
Yeah.
And then it came time that we had a couple of offers to play a few shows in America that made sense in the fall.
Sure.
And so instead of just playing those few shows that made sense, we decided to play a bunch of shows that also didn't make sense. So we
just
played in
stay-
a bunch of places in America that we'd never been to before, like in Montana and a bunch in like Indiana and
Yeah.
Kentucky and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Just
Yes.
places we'd never been to and for smaller audiences and stuff like that. And it's been kind of fun, but a big part of it was we knew we were going to eventually come down to Florida because we didn't play Florida in the spring.
Sure.
And so we've almost always played Florida whenever we toured in the States, especially in Tampa, Orlando, and Miami. We
Yeah.
always
And you're going to Miami, or you're going to Orlando next, right?
No, but that show's been canceled because
I was
of the
going to ask you
hurricane,
that. Yeah. Did that get figured out today, or?
Just late yesterday,
Yeah.
the promoter decided that they were going to cancel it.
Oh man, that's rough.
Yeah, it kinda sucks.
You guys just gonna be hanging out here for an extra day, or
We're
are you
just- we're just-
go straight through to Miami?
Not exactly sure. I mean, it depends on the weather,
Yeah.
but there's a good chance that we're going to be in Tampa for an extra day. Yeah.
So the new record is Big Black Coat.
Yeah.
You also got the EP out, Kiss Me All Night.
Yeah.
But you took some time off, and then now this year you just decided to just drop everything. That's what it seems like.
Kinda, yeah.
And was it just time? It was just time to put everything out? Or?
It was just timing in a way because, basically what happened was we put an album out 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And in between those 5 years, I worked on a whole bunch of other material.
And that was
Some-
like the Jesse Lands
Exactly.
stuff,
I did this
and
record with Jesse.
Caribou too.
I did a little bit of work with Caribou, but I
Okay.
did a lot of work with Jesse.
Yeah.
The album that Jesse and I did together came out about 3 years ago. And then we started doing work on another album together, which came out this year.
Right.
And all that same time, I was working on Junior Boy stuff, but what actually happened was I basically did with Matt a whole bunch of Junior Boys material, which we kind of decided sucked.
Oh.
And so we didn't release it.
Hey.
And so I was more invested in working on the Jesse material. And then that came out, and it was kind of, it was a success in the sense that it was well received and it gave me some new legs and stuff. I started working on new Junior Boys material anew. I threw out all the stuff I was working on.
So it really sucked that bad, is what you're telling me.
It wasn't good. It wasn't good. I mean, it was sort of like I don't know if it sucked that bad, but it was just like it was uninspiring, so
Yeah.
I didn't really want to put it out.
As a listener, I appreciate that because I think a lot of times, especially when you're kind of in these label situations, there's this pressure to put records
Well,
out.
that was the
you know?
nice thing. The thing was that at the end of our last album, we
Mm-hmm.
had finished our obligation to our label.
Okay.
So we were.
you had the
it was like
freedom.
being a free agent.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
we
You
didn't-
basically were a free agent.
We weren't signed to any label. So instead of signing to a label right away, we decided to make an album first. So the idea is we'd make an album, and when we're happy with the album, then we'll go shop that album to whichever labels.
Yeah. So obviously the first cut just wasn't up to the standards that you know.
It's just, yeah, I was just working on material, kind of just going on inertia, and I was like more excited about the stuff I was doing with Jesse.
Yeah.
So you don't want to put out something that you're not excited about.
Right.
So once I finished that album with Jesse, I was really excited about working on new material. And I took all the kind of attitudes and influences of working with her into the new Junior Boys. And then I got really excited about it.
Yeah.
And for people who like know our material pretty well, I think they'll probably notice that the album sounds a little bit different than some of our albums have in the past, and maybe might even notice that it's influenced a bit by the Jesse material.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you were, revitalized in a way. Like
Yeah.
it's different, but it carries on sort of what you started with.
Yeah, I mean,
early records.
I haven't changed that much.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I put out like a country record.
Right. But that's great. And one of the things we were talking about that earlier. One of the things I really appreciate about your music is I'm not big into electronic music, and with Junior Boys, it's like you always put the song first. You wrote a song. It just happened to sort of have obviously electronics. Whereas I feel like a lot of other electronic artists just sort of like, let's just throw all these cool sounds together and just whatever.
It usually starts with the like cool sound part.
Sure.
And then turn it into a song. But I have a love of songwriting and some aptitude for it that I've always had.
Yeah.
Ever since I was a kid, liked really classic songwriting. You know? And so that's a big part of my musical mind or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, that comes across in your music. And I mean, obviously the sound is great, but, I feel like to have a sustainable career, like you guys have had, that without the songs, I mean, what are people going to come back to?
Yeah, I think that's a common thing to lots of people who like the material, But my worry sometimes is that I get into a rabbit hole with the songwriting stuff. And so a lot of the new material I tried to write really fast,
Yeah.
just to make sure that everything sounded kind of spontaneous.
Yeah, and how do you create like a sense of spontaneity on?
That's easy. All you got to do is just press play on a bunch of synthesizers and machines and press record,
And just
you'll
just go
find that
down?
things happen pretty spontaneously.
I imagine that you're making music in like a bunker with just tons of synthesizers.
That's pretty.
Is that
pretty close?
Pretty close.
Yeah, it's pretty close. Yeah, I have a studio in Hamilton, and it's a fairly small room, and it has a huge amount of synthesizers, and
A lot of cool stuff, I'm sure.
yeah, it's a really fun. It's a fun for me. For me, making music is kind of like is a little bit like playing a game or something like that. It's you're there with a bunch of technology that you've invested in, that you've somewhat learned how to control or master, but not really.
Yeah, it still beats you from time to time.
And there's wires and things, and you press go, and things happen, and you just kind of are twiddling. Like that's basically what the musical process is for me. It's not that different than than playing a video game.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. And you've stayed in Hamilton though. Like,
Right.
a lot of people I feel like in your position might move to LA or New York or
I struggled for a long time with the notion of moving to Tampa.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no.
You'd be the first person to say that.
Yeah, I mean, it's where I'm from. It's where I'm comfortable. It's like I like other cities a lot. In fact, Los Angeles I like a lot. But I'm just one of those people who just needs to live in a place where they feel they belong.
Yeah.
And that's just how I am. But Matt, the other guy in the band, he's lived in Germany for almost a decade.
Oh, wow.
So he comes back and forth and works.
And then do you guys work together
Yeah.
on the stuff? You don't ship back and forth Dropbox files?
Not a
or-
lot. We have done that before, but it's not such a fun process.
Yeah, I
And
feel
so
like
if it's not fun, that was kind of the thing that, you know, to be honest, the stuff with the old material was a lot that I wasn't liking, was a little bit too much of that. And so it sucks the fun out of it.
Yeah.
And so if it's not fun, it's not worth doing.
Yeah, and I guess that ruins, like you're saying, the spontaneity, because, you know, if
Exactly,
you're
yeah.
like having to write back to something that Matt sent or whatever,
Yeah,
you know.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's
and then
rough.
there's a bit of weird pressure with it because it's like part of making music is you have to be able to throw out the material you don't like.
For sure.
So if somebody sent you something, you kind of feel this obligation to be like, oh man, he went through the trouble of fucking, you know, like
Making something.
transferring this, you know, like
Yeah.
that probably like took 4 hours. You know what I mean? Like it's just
Right,
like,
especially on that German internet.
yeah, you know what I mean? So it's just like, it just makes it so that you're like much more precious about the thing in a way that you don't want to be. And then it's just another thing. It's just remote communication is terrible.
Yeah.
Like everybody, I'm sure, has had some email text conversation with their girlfriend blow up in their face because,
Yeah.
like,
Because you didn't understand
you
the
didn't understand,
context.
you know,
or,
yeah, exactly. So
Well,
it's-
yeah. I was actually going to ask you about Jessie and how you
Sure.
guys met, because I know she's from Hamilton also.
She
right?
is from Hamilton, yeah. We've known each other for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
I knew her cousin for a really long time, but I really met her through Matt's sister.
Okay.
So Matt, the other guy in Junior Boys, his sister, Amy, is Jesse's best friend. And so I've known her for a really long time. And at a certain point, I knew that she was a music student. She went to Concordia University in Montreal. And she was in Hamilton, and I needed somebody to do some backing vocals and to play some keyboard parts. And so I just asked her. We got to talking, and one of the things that we were talked a lot about was the fact that her late father, had a whole bunch of electronic music equipment. He was a musician himself,
Sweet.
and he like had all this equipment, and she inherited it all, and she was interested in using it and learning it and stuff like that. And so we became like sort of musical partners by virtue of learning this stuff,
Just messing around with that equipment.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and we found that we were like really copacetic as writers and stuff like that. And we started writing, and the first stuff we started writing actually wasn't so good either, but we kind of found a groove with it. And it was really at a time in my life when I was really needed some non-Junior Boys.
Yeah, it needs
Refreshment.
something different.
Yeah.
And how long did you guys work on that record? The first
The
one?
first one we worked on for a couple of years because it was like going back and forth and trying different things. We threw out a lot of material. And we worked on it for a few years, and we had enough material to sort of give a demo to labels, and we sent some to labels, and nobody was very interested. But on a weird trip, I went to Spain, and I was with an old friend of mine, Steve, who I used to live with when I was in England.
Yeah.
And he runs this label, Hyperdub. And I just happened to play it for him, not thinking he would be that interested in signing it, because I didn't think it was really his thing. But he was really enthusiastic and wanted to sign it. And so immediately I was like, well, okay, well, we better finish this record.
Yeah, you better make some music then, huh?
And so the finishing of the record was very fast.
Right. And then it just kind of grew.
It
from
grew
there.
and it did well. And then we started working on a second record after I finished Big Black Coat.
Yeah.
Or actually around the same time as I was finishing it. I was kind of working on 2 albums at the same time. So this year I put out Big Black Coat and then Oh No, which is the second record by Jesse.
And then later, Kiss Me All Night.
Kiss Me All Night.
Yeah.
And I actually put out an EP as well, or a 12-inch on just under my own name with Boris, the guy who's playing tonight,
Oh, okay, right
as
on.
well. That was on.
That I haven't heard yet, so I'll have to get that.
That's on Caribou's label,
Okay.
Jalong.
Right on. And you said you worked a little bit with Caribou.
I have over the years. Yeah, we're old friends. He's also from Hamilton. And so, yeah, I've worked with him over the years, but in a very kind of hands-off, kind of friendly way. I mixed a couple songs for him. We wrote 1 or 2 songs together for his records, and he played on some of my records and stuff like that.
So Kiss Me All Night is actually probably one of my favorite pieces of music that you guys have done. I really love the EP format. I don't
Yeah,
know.
so do I.
I feel like it fell out of favor for a while. Back in the day, it was like you went into, Sam Goody or a CD store or whatever, and
Yeah.
like you looked at the tracks and were like, oh, this says 4 songs and this says 12 songs.
Yeah.
So I'm going to buy the one with 12 songs.
Yeah.
But now it's like you're on Spotify and everything's the same.
Yeah.
So I don't know. For some reason now, like maybe it's because I'm busier and I have less time to digest an album, but I love the EP format.
I really like it too. I mean, the thing that's a little unfortunate about it is that it kind of just like, because there's so much music that comes out, it kind of falls between the cracks,
Yeah.
You have publicists and stuff like that who put all this energy into albums, and then you put out an EP and it's kind of, no one knows it's happening. But
Yeah, it
as a
doesn't have
matter,
the same kind of machine that an album does.
sometimes, although one of my good friends through Caribou is Kieran Hebden, who goes under the name Fortet, and he's had a tremendous amount of success with EPs. For me, I really think going forward, singles and EPs is really what I'm going to be focusing on with Junior Boys for a while.
And that makes sense, like as with the way the music industry is moving now.
You don't have to get all worked up about an album. An album is a whole bunch of pressure that is kind of is actually kind of harmful in sustaining an interest in making music all the time.
Yeah.
Because you just build this whole thing up, then you have to wait for months to get it out, and then you put it out, and then you have to try and sell the damn thing forever and ever.
Right.
And it's just like...
And then you got to go on this month-long
yeah,
tour.
and it's just so long before you can get back to making music again.
Yeah.
So...
And is that the part that you really love? Is
Yeah,
it the making,
I like
the
the making
studio?
music, and I like doing performances and stuff like that. But I think I would, in the future, probably prefer to do the tours and stuff in shorter segments. Not doing months and months at a time, but doing. And when you do EPs and stuff, you have more flexibility doing that.
Yeah, and you can also sort of control your output a little better, because
Yeah.
if you want to just put out a couple tracks, you can do that.
Exactly, yeah.
You don't have to build up. Because I feel like a lot of times, too, with albums is, you have a 12, 14-song album and, 8 of the songs are really good and the rest are, you're just trying to meet that quota. Not you specifically. I'm saying,
it's
I'm just saying
you
albums
just want
in
people to
general.
listen to the
Yeah.
stuff, because ultimately nobody buys the records and nobody buys the EPs. Nobody buys music anyway.
Right,
You know what I
right.
mean? So
Yeah.
who cares, really?
They'll just add it to their playlist.
Exactly.
And so what do you think about streaming in general? I mean, clearly that's where the industry is heading. Is that a good
Yeah.
thing?
No, it's a terrible thing in
Yeah.
the sense that, like, I mean, it would be a great thing if they paid.
Right.
But they don't. So it's a terrible thing. It's like there was a little bit of time there where it looked for a second like buying digital records was actually going to be a thing for a
Yeah.
little bit. And then streaming happened.
And that was around the time where, your first couple records were coming out. I
Yeah,
feel like.
I
That was
mean-
like the height of like the iTunes revolution.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. I mean, it sucks and it doesn't. It's like, I mean...
Yeah. It's
I mean, it's hard for me to complain in the sense that, like, I get to make music.
Yeah.
But I certainly don't make a lot of money doing it, and I'd like to make more money.
Yeah, well, obviously.
So
yeah. And,
so I don't want to be like, streaming.
and that's the thing that sucks is from the industry side, it's like, yeah, streaming isn't great,
Yeah.
But as a consumer and as a listener, I'm like, oh, hell yeah. Like,
Well, the thing
you
is,
know?
like, I don't really like to make people feel like they're like Nazis for streaming.
Yeah, of
things.
course.
But the other thing that kind of sucks a little bit about streaming is just the format is kind of crap. I mean, some of them sound better. What I really don't love is like people putting up the music on YouTube. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain
Yeah.
things that when it becomes out of my control, I don't like it. I don't like live videos of us that sound like we're in a toilet. They're like streaming on YouTube. That kind of thing I don't love. Just because, I like to be in control of
Yeah, well, you
my
put
own
so much
material.
time
Exactly,
and
yeah.
energy into how something sounds,
Yeah.
for somebody to, just rip the audio and whatever.
But, people who are like joining Spotify or all those kinds of things, there's nothing wrong with that. I just wish Spotify paid a little bit better.
Yeah, I think everybody does,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Well, I think the issue is not that they're not paying, because I think they are paying. It's that
Sure.
the money's not going to the artists and the songwriters themselves. I feel like a lot of it goes other places.
I'm not sure how it works, to be honest, technically. I mean, in the sense that, I basically have companies that collect various royalties for me, and,
Sure.
and that's how it works. But I definitely know that I'm broke.
Yeah.
You know.
So how do you fix that going forward? What's the plan? What's
Well-
next for Junior Boys?
Well, it's not so bad for me because I do other things, you know.
Right.
And I live in a pretty cheap city.
Which is why you didn't move to LA, right?
Exactly. So that actually helps a lot. And
Yeah.
I feel for people who feel like they have to move to New York City or something in order
Yeah.
to make it in music. And in fact, we probably could have been a more successful band had I moved to New York City and tried to grease elbows or whatever you're supposed to do.
Yeah, I don't know.
But-
I don't know. I don't know if you would have.
Maybe. I mean, it's possible I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But those places are awfully expensive, and so I couldn't really afford to live there.
Yeah, well, I think there's a little bit of a catch-22 with that, you know, because I hear that from a lot of bands that they want to move to New York or LA or whatever because that's where the action is and that's where everybody is. But at least for me, it's cooler to hear about a band, you know, that's like from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and hear the kinds of emotions and sounds that come out of a city that I
I've
don't know about.
always felt that the same way. I've always been very what's the word? I've always been like very drawn or I always love music that comes from places that seem unlikely or
Totally.
from places that are, you know, for a good example, if suddenly I heard there was an exciting electronic music scene in Tampa, Florida, I would find that more exciting than to find out that there is an exciting music scene in London, England. Do you know what I mean?
Right,
It's
yeah,
like
because
there's
you
something
expect
about
it to be
Exactly.
cool in London because it's London.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And usually what happens in cities that are kind of, I don't know what you want to call them, secondary markets, secondary city,
Yeah.
whatever, those kind of cities. Usually those cities are they're not as obsessed with being in the sort of zeitgeist, you know, like
Yeah.
being like of the moment, you know,
Right.
those kind of cities explore, you know, it's not an accident that electronic music happened in Detroit, which had this kind of weird isolation
Yeah.
of kind of suburban black kids who listen to an extremely wide variety of music, which was, you know, a lot of black urban music, but a lot of weird European new wave music and stuff like that, and it created something unique. And so that can only happen kind of in secondary cities often.
yeah, I think so.
Or in depressive cities, or in cities that are kind of insular. Those kind of things are just localized in places. And so, I mean, Hamilton doesn't really have that, but certainly there's something about these Rust Belt cities like Detroit and Cleveland and Buffalo and Hamilton and all that.
Sure.
They share a common heritage and a common history. So I think I identified with Detroit music for that reason.
And would you say your sound then is more rooted in kind of a Detroit electronic style?
Yeah, but you know, in many ways, it's rooted in not only the Detroit sound, but also the surrounding areas. A lot of the people that I loved growing up, who were part of quote unquote Detroit techno, weren't from Detroit. You know, people like Richie Houghton, who was a Canadian, guys like Dan Bell, and all sorts of people who were from other cities in the kind of within like 2 hours distance. You know.
Right.
And even the Detroit techno sound was a very suburban sound. A lot of the guys, you know, like Derek May and those guys, they were from like the sort of suburbs, you know.
Yeah, they weren't.
They weren't from like inner city. I mean, maybe I don't know their backgrounds that well. You know, I'm going to get into a flame war about where Derek May was
Yeah,
born.
you're going to
you
get a
know,
lot of
but-
angry Twitter comments
Yeah,
after
but,
this.
But I definitely know that scene was definitely, in lots of ways, a combination of inner city, but also very suburban.
Yeah. And speaking of scenes, so I mean, you mentioned, you know, Dan from Caribou's from Hamilton, Jesse's from Hamilton. You are like, is there a budding scene in Hamilton? Is there?
I mean, it's a weird thing that all of these electronic musicians have done reasonably well in the world from Hamilton, in the sense that there's not a huge amount of other music that's from Hamilton. I mean, Hamilton's claim to fame musically is mainly with these kind of proto-punk bands that were kind of big in the late 70s and early 80s in Canada as the kind of people who sort of developed punk in Canada. But other than that, it's a really blue-collar, working-class town, so it's a really kind of rock and roll sort of town.
Yeah.
And so the electronic thing in Hamilton is a strange kind of blip, but it's definitely a real thing.
And are there venues there that are supporting?
Definitely not.
Not?
No.
Do you have to go to basically Toronto to?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, you know, like we have good friends who are in a band called Orphix, who are also from Hamilton, and they play in like, you know, the top sort of techno clubs in Europe every couple of weeks now. But there's
great for
no
them.
way they would play in Hamilton. You know? And we don't really play often in Hamilton. There's nowhere to play in Hamilton, so it's, you know.
So you-
but I
since-
like that about it.
You like that there's that you can just
Yeah, it's not like nobody gives a shit. You know? It's cool.
there's definitely probably something freeing about that you don't
Yeah,
have to. you
exactly.
know.
No one's impressed by me.
So tell us about the rest of the tour here while we're winding up.
So tomorrow has been canceled in Orlando, but tonight we're playing Tampa, and then on Saturday we're playing at a festival in Miami, so long as Miami exists in 2 days.
which is questionable at this
Yeah.
moment in time. So
But yeah, I think it's called the 3 Points Festival.
yeah, and then is that the end of the tour?
No, then we are off for a couple of days, and then we go to Mexico for 3 shows.
Oh, that sounds
Yeah.
fun. You gonna get into any wild times in Mexico?
I assume so. I mean, it's going to be a bit of a whirlwind. We have 3 shows in 3 days. So we play in Mexico City, and then I think we go to Monterrey, and then we go to Guadalajara.
And I don't know too much about Mexican geography, but I'm assuming those aren't close to
No,
one
we got to
another.
fly. I mean, Mexico City and Monterrey aren't so far, but
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to fly each day, I think.
Oh, that's gonna be rough.
It's not going to be the funnest thing, but it's kind of exciting for us to go back to Monterrey just because we haven't been there. I haven't been there in a really long time. We played there once a long time ago, and it became a rather kind of like notoriously dangerous city. But I remember it being really beautiful. So that's kind of fun. And Guadalajara is great. Mexico City, this will be our, like, I don't know, 4th time playing Mexico City or something
That's
like that.
awesome. And then are you going to Europe after that? Or
Yeah,
is-
so then we'll go home for a couple of weeks, and then we do about a week and a half of European shows, playing in Lisbon and Poland, and then we have one sort of final show in London for the year. We've
And then-
played London a couple of times this year, so we'll do one more in London.
Nice. So that'll close out quite a busy
Yeah.
2016 for Junior
Absolutely,
Boys.
yeah.
As you mentioned, you got the album Big Black Coat,
Yeah.
the EP,
Yeah.
the work you did with Jesse's
Jesse's
came out,
album, yeah,
and
and
then
a 12-inch called But Wait, There's More.
oh right, well, very fitting title given
thanks.
how much you've put out this year. The output's been strong. So should we expect another 4 releases from you next year, or?
I think it's probably pretty likely I'll put something out in 2017, but I'm not sure what yet.
You're just still feeling that out. And
I
do you
I
write?
got nothing else to do.
Yeah, exactly. And Spotify's got to give you more money.
Exactly,
So
yeah.
you know
I gotta pay
that's
those
true.
bills.
Exactly. The more tracks you got on there, the more streams.
I mean, it's true in a way. Like, being broke does keep you motivated. That's for sure.
I'm sure it will. So, well, hopefully you won't be broke
Okay.
for too long.
Good.
So,
Yeah, we'll see. About that.
all right. Well, this was Jeremy Greenspan from Junior Boys hanging out here in Ybor City. Thanks for coming by, man. Keep coming to Tampa. And,
Thank you.
It's been fun.
Thank you.